If you don't really feel connected to other people in any meaningful way, like you can see them and talk to them and even touch them, but doing so doesn't really attach to anything in your heart, if that makes sense, ironically, you are not alone in this. Somewhere between 10 and 25% of people report chronic feelings of loneliness and isolation, regardless of the quantity and quality of their interpersonal relationships. Meaning, these aren't necessarily people who don't actually have anybody in their lives. These might be people who have friends, who have family, who even have a romantic partner, and yet they feel alone despite all of this. These numbers are sharply on the rise in the past few years to such an alarming degree that the US Surgeon General has officially recognized something called the loneliness epidemic and published guidelines on it. Now, it's important to recognize that loneliness and being alone are not interchangeable terms. Being alone is not in and of itself a bad or unpleasant experience. I am alone right this very second as I'm recording this video, and I've been spending all day in therapy sessions, so frankly, that's fine right now. Being alone can be pleasant. Being alone can be nice. Being alone can be wonderful sometimes. Loneliness is different. Loneliness is a longing for more human connection. And we can be lonely even when we are not alone if we don't feel a sense of belonging or connection to the people around us. And loneliness in particular is what is dramatically on the rise within the past few years. And maybe you're thinking like, okay, does this really matter though? So we're less connected, we're less social. Is that really a big deal? Is that actually a problem? And the answer is yes, it is a really big deal. And this is coming from an introvert with interpersonal trauma who doesn't like most people very much. So please consider the source here. If I'm saying, yes, this is a problem, it is probably a problem because I'm okay with more amount of being alone than most people are. But there are entire regions of our brain that have no purpose other than to connect socially with other people. And when our meaningful interactions start to dwindle, those parts of our brains go generally unused, and the effects of that can be catastrophic. And we are seeing it every day. Loneliness, higher rates of loneliness are correlated with higher rates of depression, higher rates of anxiety, generally higher rates of stress, increased risk of premature death, both intentional and accidental, heart disease, stroke, and dementia, just to name a few things. So yes, this is bad. This is a very real, very significant problem. And I don't think it's a temporary problem either. COVID seems to be the thing that really took this to the next level, but it's not getting better. It's actually getting worse. And I think it's going to continue to get worse. Frankly, it's going to ruin and prematurely end many lives because technology is going to become more immersive. AI companions are going to become more compelling. And in a very real, physical, and visceral way, we as human beings are going to become more and more disconnected. I am 100% sure of this, and it's going to be a problem. Knowing how to navigate this growing built-in disconnection that society is inevitably going to have will almost certainly be a key factor in dividing those who thrive from those who struggle in this next chapter of humanity that is coming. We are more and more accepting of substitutions for real social interactions. And in the moment, those things can be okay. Like, there's not an immediate consequence to that. I liken it to if you stop eating solid food and just start living off meal replacement shakes instead. If all your interactions, I should say, are online or digital or virtual, that's kind of what that's like. Like, in the short term, you'll be fine. You're not going to immediately become disconnected and lonely and depressed from that. But if that continues to be your way of living for a prolonged period of time, it will have profound effects on you. Just as if you lived off meal replacement shakes alone, even if the overall caloric energy that you're taking in is adequate, you are going to become malnourished from the lack of variety and from the lack of actually having all of your nutritional needs met. Substitutions for social interaction include things like parasocial relationships, which if you're not familiar with that term, it's when like this actually right now technically is a parasocial relationship, but it's when you become kind of a fan or attached to like someone online, a content creator, a streamer, something like that, a celebrity. And because you're able to follow their life to a much greater degree than we could 5 or 10 years ago, you almost feel like you know this person. You know enough about their life that you almost feel like you have a relationship with them, and you comment on their stuff, and they might even like or comment your stuff back sometimes. So like technically you do have a minuscule relationship with them. But many people are using these parasocial relationships that have no real engagement or interaction to speak of as a replacement for reciprocal physical relationships with other human beings. And it's just not the same. It doesn't use the same parts of your brain, and it ultimately isn't going to satisfy you the way other types of relationships would. And again, it can feel great and rewarding in the moment, but that is a big part of why we're seeing this growing loneliness epidemic and all of these side effects that go along with it. We're also at a place in life where we can have tremendous fun by ourselves. Like solo entertainment is readily accessible at all times, whether that's Netflix or gaming or just social media on your phone. Like we really don't need other people to have fun anymore. It used to be really hard to have fun by yourself. And in and of itself, I think that's a wonderful change. Like all of these things are good in theory. I want to say that, otherwise this is going to have major like old man shakes his fist at cloud energy. I don't hate these things. I just think they're being overutilized. And if all of your entertainment is solo or online, you're just really missing a lot of that reciprocal in-person interaction. The last thing I see in the substitution category that I think is really causing this loneliness epidemic is what I call economic detachment. What I mean by that is basically you can buy all your stuff online, right? Like you could literally not leave your home, and as long as you have money, you can survive. And that's not great for us. Because, it wasn't that long ago where we had to have relationships with people to get our needs met. Like, your food was grown by, like, the farmer down the street, right? And, like, if you made that farmer mad, he might not sell you food anymore. And frankly, that change is good for somebody like me, because I probably would have, like, pissed off the town doctor and then got kicked out of the tribe and, like, died of a curable illness because I'm not a super social person. So for somebody like me, it's a good thing. But for society as a whole, I think it's really not. Because we end up just being able to survive without any relationships whatsoever. And because we can survive without relationships, it's easy for us to convince ourselves that it's okay or even good to not have those relationships. And it's not, and that's why this is happening. Work and the economy definitely play a big role in this growing sense of disconnection as well. Generally speaking, just the way the economy is going, most of us have to work more. And you might have interactions with other people at work, but unless you're very fortunate, you probably don't have close, meaningful personal connections at work. They're likely more superficial, friendly, collegial relationships, but not like close, tight, intimate, meaningful, vulnerable relationships. We move around a lot more for our jobs. Like it's not that common to stay at a job long term anymore. So those coworker relationships are often very acute. They don't last very long. We pick up and go, we move, we might even move to different cities, different states, different countries in some cases. A lot of us are working remotely. There is a lot of disconnection from family. Like you grew up in some certain place and then you move because of your job and now you don't have a close relationship with your family anymore. And again, none of these things are inherently bad, but all of them happening at the same time combined with all of these other things, it's really ruining us. It's really screwing us up. And the data shows that. Like, again, this is the US surge in general. These are just my theories for why, but this thing is definitely happening. There's no two ways about it. I'll keep this one brief, but I also think there's a directionless component to this, meaning a lot of us feel like the amount of people reporting that they feel like they have no purpose in life is really, really dramatically going up. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Our jobs are often like disconnected from tangible, visible outcomes that we can see in many cases. Very few people, or relatively few people, are involved with any kind of religion or spirituality these days, and the world is just getting darker and darker. And the idea of doing this all for nothing, I think, becomes a less and less appealing proposition the more arduous and grueling life becomes. There's a lot of, this one might sound weird coming from me, because sometimes I describe this as almost like a good thing. There is a growing focus on just the self and individuality that, well, I don't think it is all bad, it is pulling us apart from one another. And social media has not helped with this. It's really easy to get obsessed with yourself and obsessed with your own happiness and obsessed with your quality of life and self-improvement. And those things can be healthy to a degree, but it's so incredibly easy to overdo it now. And when we are overly concerned with ourselves, it is very difficult to have meaningful relationships with other people because we only have so much energy to distribute. And if more and more of it is turned inward, there's just not that much left for other people. And that's how we can end up having people in our lives but not feel like they mean anything to us, because they don't, because we're keeping it all inside. So what the heck do we do about all this? I'm not going to act like I've got this all figured out. On a big picture, zoomed out societal level, I actually have no idea whatsoever. I have no answers for how we turn this around as a society. That is above my pay grade. As a psychologist, I focus more on the individual sitting in front of me. I have been having a lot of success helping individual people navigate this loneliness epidemic through a few different general principles. The biggest one by far, the big overarching principle, is use technology as a supplement to your relationships, not as a substitution for them. I think it is fantastic that we can stay in touch without having to physically see one another. I think that it is amazing that we can continue to have relationships with people who have moved, or can make a friend across the globe who we would have otherwise never had the opportunity to meet. And we can engage in recreational activities with people who are not physically present. All of those things are great. But if that's all you do socially, again, I know I'm kind of like really driving this point home, but you need to understand it. There are parts of your brain that do not get used in those types of social interactions. And those types of your brain are actually really important for your mental health. And it's just like a muscle. If you don't lose it, if you don't use it, it kind of starts to decay and it stops working right. And when that happens to parts of our brains, because the changes that have happened in our society are not designed for our mental health, they're not for us, they're for corporations to grow larger and have more money and for billionaires to get richer. And I'm sorry if that sounds cynical, but it's true. That's just the way it is. Societal changes are not geared towards human improvement. They are geared towards making the 1% even more than 1%. And so we have to be able to look at the direction society's going in and say, this is not all good. I need, even though this is normal, and this is what most people are doing, this is not healthy. And I need to pull myself back from this and work on having a balance of in-person social interaction and virtual social interactions. Some of the very specific action steps I encourage people to take are to connect with someone at least once per day. Like, don't go an entire day without an interaction. It doesn't necessarily have to be in person every single day. But being completely offline from human, unless you're sick or something, like then it's fine, right? But going just completely offline from all of humanity for 24 hours or more, even if you're a very introverted person, things tend to get dark very quickly when we do that. It's not great for us. I also think at least once per day, or at least every other day, because this one can be tough if you have like anxiety or agoraphobia. I get that. Try to leave your house and try to go where people are. Now, that doesn't mean you have to actually interact with them, because here's the cool thing. These parts of your brain I'm talking about that only get used in in-person social interactions, they get used even just by being around people. So if you go to a bookstore or a coffee shop or a park and just there are people there, even if you don't actually talk to anybody, even if you're just there doing your own thing, just seeing people and hearing voices and seeing bodies is actually really good for the social functioning of our brains. So if you're not a super outgoing person, if you're not up for even a casual chat with a stranger, that's okay. I'm really not either, so I'm kind of in your camp with that one. but it's still not good to just be in your home all day, every day for like multiple days on end. It just gets really bad. Our brains do not thrive under those conditions. I do think that you should strive to have an in person interaction with somebody outside your home at least once per week. If you're extroverted, that's probably not going to be anywhere near enough. If you're more on the introverted side of things, and if you have a job that deals with people, like there's all kinds of variables, right? I'm not going to act like I know your life. But at least once a week, you really, really should, or your brain's just not going to be real happy with you. And the last thing I would say on technology, I know this one's tricky, and I know you're probably not going to like hearing it. I mean, you don't have to do it. I'm not the boss of your life. I would really consider setting a screen time limit because it's very, very difficult for us to just auto-regulate and like pull ourselves away from something really stimulating for something that in the moment might be less stimulating. But what is most stimulating in the moment is not inherently what is most healthy for us. And we do need to have a balance, and we do need, I think, to have a screen time limit in order to have healthy social functioning. Another problem that I think is driving a lot of social dysfunction is we have a hard time accepting flaws and imperfections in other people. Like, we want the best of everything. And again, I think the access we have to people on social media is a big part of this. We're getting more and more picky about who we will interact with. And that could be good. Like, you should have standards, you should have boundaries, you should be assertive. But if you're becoming kind of a perfectionist about who you will even talk to or who you will even let into your life, because you saw someone who lives 1,000 miles away who seems to understand you better than anyone like actually physically close to you, I get that. But it's going to become a problem. It is, because you don't really have access to that person in the way that you need. And being able to form relationships with people who don't fully understand you, who aren't exactly like you, and who frankly aren't perfect is something we need to do. It just is. If you have any opportunities to volunteer for something that means something to you, that can cover a lot of ground, because then we have an intervention that's not only affecting the social part of our brain, it's also giving us an opportunity to combat some of the meaninglessness and hopelessness that is a big part of a lot of our lives, if we're being honest. So that's kind of a kill two birds with one stone kind of thing. And lastly, just consider doing things in person, even when you don't have to, for the sake of your brain and for the sake of your mental health. The one that always comes to mind for me is groceries. Like, yes, you can have your groceries delivered. Yes, it saves time. Yes, it's very convenient. Yes, I do it sometimes myself. But if you feel up to it, if you're not in a major time crunch, if the weather isn't terrible, if you're not in the middle of a panic attack or an agoraphobic episode, consider going to the store, because we need that. We need that part of our brains to be stimulated at least on occasion to maintain some level of connection to other people and the world and some level of optimal or at least acceptable mental health. So those are my action steps for, on an individual level, addressing the loneliness epidemic. Now, before I go, I gotta ask. Change the studio a little bit, got a little bit of a backdrop going on behind me. What do you guys think? If you stuck around this long, I'd appreciate you let me know in the comments. Do you like having a little bit more pieces of flair, for lack of a better term, behind me? Is it too much? Is it distracting? Let me know. As always, I hope this helps, and I will see you next time. Take care.